At 76, Tabitha Dunmore believed that a mother's love, once given for 40 years, could never be handed back to her like an unpaid bill. She believed it the way you believe in the floor under your feet without thinking until the morning it gives. She had raised 4 children in a narrow house on Edward Street here in Hattiesburg, washed their fevers down with cool cloths, sat up the night's croup, took their breath. She had drawn the baths that loosened her husband's bad back until the day his back stopped aching for good. Her hands smelled of wet cedar and warm mineral salt. Always. A smell her children had learned to wrinkle their noses at. But before this summer ended, the children who signed her eviction would stand in line at her door, and the humble room they laughed at would decide who kept a roof at all. She did not know that yet. On the morning of her birthday, she only knew the cake. It was a yellow cake with caramel icing, the kind her own mother used to make, and she had baked it herself because no one offered. 76 candles would have set the smoke alarm screaming. So she pressed in 7.5, a little joke for herself, and set it in the center of the table. She had ironed the good cloth. She had dried each teacup 3 times before she set it down, the way she always did, turning the rim to the light to catch a water spot no one else would ever see. Her son, Brett, came at 6 with his wife, Camille, and the 2 grandchildren. He came in without knocking, the way men do in houses they have already decided are theirs. "Smells like a swamp in here, Mama," Brett said, setting his keys on the counter. "You been running that tub again?" "I drew a soak for Mr. Pell down the road," she said. "His knees. You don't have a license to be drawing anybody anything." Camille said it lightly, smiling, hanging her good purse on the back of a chair. "One of these days, somebody slips and it's a lawsuit, and then where are we?" Tabitha let it pass. She had learned, over a lifetime, that silence was a thing you could pour over a moment to keep it from catching fire. She poured tea. She cut nothing yet because the cake was for after supper, and supper was the meatloaf Brett had liked since he was 9. They ate. The children, Dylan and little Reese, kicked their heels against the chair rungs and asked, could they have cake now? And Tabitha said soon, "Baby, soon." Brett ate 2 helpings and pushed his plate back and reached into the breast pocket of his shirt. He took out a folded paper. It had the crisp, official look of something printed at a county office. 3 holes punched down the side, a date stamped in blue at the top. "Mama, we got to talk about something, and I'd rather just say it plain than dance around it." "All right. The Edward Street house. It's been carrying us all underwater a long time. The taxes, the roof, all of it. Camille and me, we sat down with a man about the numbers, and the truth is, the house is the only real asset this family's got left, and it can't keep being a place where one person rattles around." He unfolded the paper and smoothed it flat against the cloth, right beside the cake. "There's a place out on Lincoln Road, Greenbrier, real nice. They got a garden and a craft room, and the date here, this is when they can take you, July the 1st. He began to read it aloud. The unit number, the monthly figure, the line about furnishings to be reduced to what fits a single room. He read it in the same even voice he used to read box scores, and the grandchildren went quiet, watching, because children always know when the air in a room has changed. "You're putting me out," Tabitha said. "Not a question, just laying the words down to see them. I'm getting you cared for." Brett did not look up from the page. "You're a line item we can't carry, Mama. I'm sorry. That's just the math of it." Camille reached over and squeezed Tabitha's wrist, the cool, dry squeeze of a woman who has practiced looking sorry in a mirror. It's the loving thing, really. You shouldn't be alone at your age, smelling like cedar, talking to pipes. The cake sat between them with its 7.5 candles, unlit, uncut. Now, there is a particular arithmetic that some children learn. They can total every dollar a parent spent and never once tally the winters that parent went without a coat so they could have one. Brett had a number for the house. He had no number for the croup nights. He believed, sitting there, that he was a generous man doing a hard thing, and that is the most dangerous kind of man there is. Tabitha looked at her grandson Dylan, 12 years old, watching his father read her out of her own kitchen. She did not want him to remember her crying, so she did not cry. She stood and she gathered the plates and she carried them to the sink and she ran the water until it was hot and she washed them, one by one, with her back to the table. "Mama," Brett said, "did you hear me about July 1st? "I heard you," she said. "Take the children home. It's late." What Brett did not know, what none of them knew, was that his contracting business had been bleeding for 2 years and that he had borrowed against the Edward Street house to keep his trucks on the road, and that a man in an office in Jackson had told him he was 60 days from losing everything unless that house turned into cash. He did not feel like a thief. He felt like a man protecting his children's future. He had simply decided that his mother was the soft place the loss could land because she had always been the soft place everything landed. They left. Camille took half the meatloaf in a dish she did not ask for. The screen door clapped twice in the frame, and then the house was quiet in the way only a house full of 40 years can be quiet. Tabitha put the cake in the refrigerator. She blew out the candles she had never lit, pressing each one down between 2 fingers, and set them in a row on the windowsill to dry. She did not sleep on the legal side of July. She moved before they could move her, the way a woman who has cleaned other people's messes, her whole life moves, with grim and tidy purpose. On the last Saturday in June, she packed what was hers. It came to less than she expected. 4 boxes and 2 suitcases and a steamer trunk that had belonged to her mother. And on top of the boxes, she set the only thing she could not bear to leave, a framed photograph of a woman with a hard, beautiful face, standing in a doorway with steam pouring out behind her. That was Ardith, Tabitha's mother, dead 20 years now, and gone strange and silent the last years of her life. And in all that silence, she had said one thing on her deathbed that Tabitha had turned over 1,000 times and never solved. "The steam keeps what paper forgets," Ardith had said, gripping her daughter's wrist with a strength a dying woman should not have had. "You remember that?" Tabitha had thought it was the morphine talking. She set the photograph on top of the boxes and she carried them, one at a time, out onto the porch to wait for a truck she had not yet found the money to hire. She was sitting on the top step beside her bags, in the heavy June heat, the cicadas sawing in the pines and the Leaf River close enough to smell on the wet air when a long gray sedan slowed at the curb. An old man got out. He was tall and stooped, with a white mustache and a city worker's careful way of closing a car door, soft so as not to slam it. "Tabitha Dunmore," he said. It was not a question either. "Do I know you? You knew me when you were knee-high. Odell Pruitt. I inspected waterworks for the city near 40 years. He came up the walk slow, favoring one hip, and he looked at the boxes on the porch and at the suitcases and at the framed photograph of Ardith standing in her steam, and something moved behind his face. I heard your boy put you out. Whole town's heard. He read it off a paper at your supper table, they say." "News travels," Tabitha said. "It does in Hattiesburg." Odell eased himself down onto the step below her, uninvited, the way old people do when their legs make the decision for them. For a while, he said nothing. He looked out at the pines. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out an envelope yellowed at the edges, soft with age, the flap glued so long ago the glue had gone amber. "I apprenticed under your mama," he said. "Before your time? Near. Ardith Dunmore. Best pair of hands ever ran a bathhouse in this state, and I include the men in that. She could lay her palm on a pipe and tell you what was wrong 3 feet down the line. Folks called it a gift. It wasn't. It was 40 years of paying attention." He turned the envelope over in his fingers. "She left a thing with me a long time ago, made me promise I'd hold it till the day came. I'll be honest with you, I near died twice waiting, and I started to think the day wasn't coming." He held it out. "Then I heard about your supper." Tabitha did not take it. "What is it?" It's the last work order ever written for the Dunmore Bathhouse, the one on Mobile Street, the old end, that's been boarded up since 1991. He laid it on the step between them when she would not take it from his hand. The kudzu's eaten half the brick. The sign's still up. Folks still call it Miss Ardith's place. You'd remember it. You worked that floor when you were a girl. She remembered it. She remembered it the way you remember a wound that taught you something. At 19, her mother had taken her out of school and put her on the bathhouse floor, hauling buckets, scrubbing tile, learning the valves, and Tabitha had spent the whole rest of her life believing it meant her mother had seen her as a pair of useful hands and nothing warmer. The unloved daughter, the one kept for her labor. That place is a ruin, she said. It got sold years ago. Everything got sold. No, Odell said it flat. It never sold. I'd know. I keep up with the water rolls. He tapped the envelope. Go on. Read who it's addressed to. She picked it up. The paper was brittle and the ink had gone brown, but her mother's hard, slanting hand was unmistakable, and across the front, where a name should be, Ardith had not written a name at all. She had written one line, for the one who still hears the pipes. That's never been Brett, Odell said quietly. Boy can't hear a leak till it's coming through the ceiling. Your mama knew exactly who she was leaving it to. She just didn't trust paper to say it. He got to his feet, both hands on his knee, to push himself up, and he settled his hat. I held my promise. The rest is yours. Place is on Mobile Street. Keys in the envelope. You'll want to go before that boy of yours hears there's anything down there worth the trip. He went back down the walk, soft-footed, and got in his gray sedan and drove off into the green June heat without once looking back. Tabitha sat a long time on the step with her bags around her and the boarded-up past in her lap. The cicadas rose and fell. Somewhere a screen door banged. She opened the soft old envelope with one finger, and inside, against the folded work order, something small and cold slid into her palm. A key, and a single line of her mother's writing she would not understand for weeks. She closed her hand around the key and looked off down the road toward the old end of Mobile Street, where the steam had been cold for 35 years. The truck she finally hired belonged to a man named Cleve, who hauled furniture on weekends and asked no questions about why a woman of 76 was moving herself into a building the city had condemned. He drove slow down Mobile Street, past the new end with its painted curbs, into the old end where the asphalt went to patches and the pines leaned close, and the kudzu had thrown its green ropes over everything that stood still long enough to be caught. And there it was, the Dunmore Bathhouse. The sign her mother had painted by hand was still bolted to the brick, the letters faded to the color of weak tea, but you could read it if you knew it was there. Miss Ardith's place. The windows were boarded. A young oak had pushed itself up through a crack in the front walk and stood there 4 feet tall, taking its space like it had paid for it. You sure about this? Cleve said, not turning off the engine. I'm sure, Tabitha said. She was not sure. But sure was a thing you decided to be, she had learned, and then you walked toward it until your feet caught up with your mouth. The brass valve key hung against her chest on its bootlace, warm from her skin. She had worn it for 35 years. Her children thought it was junk, a bit of old metal she kept the way old women keep buttons and rubber bands, and once at Christmas, Camille had said kindly that she could buy her a real necklace if she wanted to look nice for church. Tabitha had only smiled. The key had been her mother's. Ardith had pressed it into her hand the same week she put her on the bathhouse floor and said, "This opens the part of the house that matters." And Tabitha at 19 had thought she meant the linen closet and had been hurt by it for 50 years. The front door was chained, but Tabitha did not go in the front. She went around the side through the wet green tangle, her shoes sinking in the soft ground near where the Leaf River seeped into the low places. And she found the side door her hands remembered before her mind did. It opened on a swollen hinge with a groan like a man waking from a long sleep. Inside, the dark smelled of mildew and cold iron, and underneath it, faint, the ghost of mineral salt. the smell that had lived in her own skin her whole life. Cleve helped her carry in the 4 boxes and the 2 suitcases and her mother's steamer trunk, and he set up the cot she'd bought secondhand, and he looked around at the ruin of the place in the gray light coming through the gaps in the boards, and he took off his cap. "My grandmama came here," he said, "for her arthritis. Said your mama's hands took the pain clean out of her wrists." He turned the cap in his fingers. "I won't charge you the full haul." "You'll charge me the full haul," Tabitha said. "I pay what a thing is worth, always have." And she counted the bills into his palm, and he took them because she made him, and he left her there alone in her mother's bathhouse with the night coming on. That first night, she slept poorly on the cot with her coat for a blanket, and the building talked to her the way old buildings do, creaks and settles and the small skitter of things in the walls. But under all of it, near morning, she heard something else, a sound she knew the way she knew her own pulse. Water. Somewhere deep in the dead building, in a pipe that had supposedly been dry since 1991, water was moving. Just a thread of it, a whisper in the iron. "The steam keeps what paper forgets," her mother had said. Tabitha lay on the cot in the dark and listened to the pipe sing, and for the first time since Brett read that paper at her supper table, she felt something in her chest that was not grief. It was closer to a question. And a question, when you are 76 and have been told you are a line item, is a kind of mercy. It means there is still somewhere to walk. In the morning, she went to work because work was the only prayer she had ever fully trusted. She found the main valve behind a panel her hands remembered, and it was seized with rust, and she worked it with patience and a little oil from her trunk and the heel of her palm until it gave a quarter turn and then a half, and somewhere below her the building shuddered, and a cough of brown water spat from a tap and ran and ran and slowly ran clear. She traced the lines by ear the way her mother had taught her, laying her palm flat against the cold iron, feeling for the place where the song changed, where the note went wrong, where a valve lied about being open. 40 years of paying attention. It was not a gift. Ardith had been right about that. It was only that she had never once stopped listening. By the 3rd day, she had 1 bath working. The smallest of the 6, the corner-soaking room with the green tile, where the mineral line still fed if you coaxed it. She bled the air from the pipe and let the hot mineral water rise into the old basin, and steam lifted off it and filled the little room and beaded on the tile, and the smell of warm cedar and salt rolled out the side door into the June morning, and Tabitha stood in it with her eyes closed and breathed her whole childhood in. That was the smell her children had wrinkled their noses at. That was the swamp witch smell. Standing in it now, alone, she understood for the first time that they had been ashamed of the very thing that had paid for their shoes. Word travels in Hattiesburg. Odell had said it, and it was true. By the end of that first week, an old woman named Dovie Pell, wife of the Mr. Pell, whose knees Tabitha had soaked the morning of her birthday, came knocking soft at the side door with $1 folded in her glove, and asked, almost ashamed, whether Miss Ardith's place was open again, because the new clinic gave her pills that did nothing, and her hips had not let her sleep in a year. "It's open," Tabitha said, though she had decided no such thing until the words were out. "Come in out of the heat. Mind the step." She soaked Dovie Pell's hips in the green-tiled room and added the mineral salt by feel. A pinch more of the magnesium her mother had always sworn loosened the deep ache, and she talked to her low and unhurried about nothing at all. The weather, the pines, the river being high, while the old woman's face slowly came unclenched. When Dovie left, she walked easier, and she pressed $2 more on Tabitha and would not take them back, and she told 3 people on her street, and each of those told 2 more. So it began. Not a flood, a trickle, like the first thread of water in the dead pipe. An old man with a bad shoulder, a young mother whose back had never come right after the baby, a diesel mechanic who could not close his hand all the way and wept when he could, a week later, and was angry at himself for weeping, and Tabitha pretended not to see it, because some mercies are bigger when no one names them. She charged what a soak was worth. She paid the light bill the city restored after she walked into the office and paid the back balance in cash from a coffee can. She bought a second cot and then a real bed. She was not getting rich. She was getting something better than rich. She was getting needed, which is the thing they had told her at her own birthday table that she had stopped being. It was in the second week that May Loomis came. She came at dusk, a slight woman of maybe 40, in the clean clothes of someone who works in a hospital, and she stood in the side doorway and signed something with her hands that Tabitha did not understand, and then, seeing she was not understood, took a small pad from her bag and wrote on it in a careful hand. "I think your mother paid for my schooling. I have been trying to find her family for 20 years. Tabitha read it twice. She turned the pad to the lamp. "Who are you?" she said, and then remembering, she wrote it. But May shook her head and touched her own ear and then her own eyes, and Tabitha understood she could read lips fine, and she said it again, slower, facing her. "Who are you?" May wrote. "My name is May Loomis. I delivered ice to this bathhouse when I was a girl. I lost my hearing from a fever. No school would take me. A woman here, Miss Ardith, she paid a tutor and then she paid the nursing college in Jackson. She never let me thank her. She said I should pass it down, not back. I am a nurse now. 20 years I came by and the place was boarded. Today I heard it was open." Tabitha sat down on the edge of the new bed because her legs had gone uncertain. Her mother, Ardith, the hard, silent woman who had sent her own daughter out of school to haul buckets. The mother who Tabitha had spent 50 years believing did not know how to love a child, had quietly put a deaf ice girl through nursing college and forbidden her to say thank you. Pass it down, not back. The same woman, the same hands. "She never told me," Tabitha said. "She never told me any of it." May watched her mouth and wrote gently. Maybe she did not tell with words. Maybe she was not a words person. And she looked around the steaming, half-living building with something like love, and she rolled up her sleeves, and she stayed. She knew the body, the muscle, and the joint, the things a nurse knows. Tabitha knew the water. Between them, by the third week, the corner room was not the only one running, and there were 2 pairs of hands instead of 1, and May Loomis slept in the back room and asked for no wage, only a place, and Tabitha, who knew something now about being turned out, gave her one without a single question. The old ledger turned up when Tabitha was clearing the office. It was a long green book, water-swollen, the ink feathered, and it was her mother's accounting in her mother's hard, slanting hand, going back decades. Most of it was ordinary, so many dollars for so many soaks, but down the right margin, again and again, in a column with no heading, Ardith had written names beside the word carried. Tabitha understood it slowly. Carried meant given, meant a bath taken and never charged. There were dozens of them over the years, and against one name the word appeared more than any other. S. Render, carried, 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 near every week for 11 years. Saul Render was not hard to find. Everyone in the old end of Mobile Street knew where Saul Render was, because Saul Render was a fixture, an old veteran with a steel gray crew cut who sat on the porch of the shotgun house across from the boarded bathhouse and had, the neighbors said, watched over the empty building for 35 years for reasons he never explained. He had run off more than one person who came sniffing around the property with a crowbar and a notion. When Tabitha walked across the road and showed him the green ledger and the column with his name carried down it, 11 years running, the old man's jaw worked, and he looked away at the pines a long moment. "Your mama gave me a place to soak the war out of my back when I come home and couldn't pay a nickel," he said finally. 11 years. Never once put her hand out. "When she passed, I figured the least a man could do was see nobody tore the place down." He stood up off the porch, slow, military still in the spine of him. "You're opening her up again." "I am." "Then I guess I'm still on watch," Saul Render said. And he walked back across the road with her, and from that day he sat his chair inside the bathhouse gate instead of across from it. And the men who'd been circling the property since word got out that something was happening down there found Saul Render's flat gray stare waiting for them, and they stopped coming. So that is how it stood at the halfway mark of that long June. A used-up woman, a deaf nurse her mother had secretly raised up, an old soldier her mother had secretly carried, all of them working in the steam of a building the county had written off. A chosen family, gathered out of the kindness of a dead woman none of them had been able to thank. Tabitha should have been at peace, and she nearly was. But she was a woman who listened, and there was still that thread of sound she could not place, that whisper of water moving somewhere it should not, deeper in the building than any pipe she'd yet brought back. It came from below, from the dead boiler room her mother had bolted shut, the one room her remembered hands had not yet opened. On a gray, wet morning, she took a lamp and went down. The boiler room was a low brick vault, cold, the great iron boiler squatting in the dark like a sleeping animal, and the air down there was close and metallic and smelled of old fire. She set the lamp on a shelf and ran her hand over the boiler's face, over the riveted plate gone orange with rust, and she felt it before she understood it, a shape under the rust. She took a wire brush from her apron and scraped, and the rust came away in flakes, and under it, bolted to the iron, was a seam that did not belong, a square seal, a thing made to be opened only one way, and set into the plate beside it, a small brass fitting. Shaped, she saw, for a key she had worn against her chest for 35 years. Her heart went hard and slow. She lifted the bootlace over her head and held the brass valve key up to the lamp, and held it to the fitting, and it slid in like it had been cut that morning for that single lock, the part of the house that matters. Her mother's voice across 50 years. This opens the part of the house that matters, not the linen closet, this. But she did not turn it yet, because her brush had cleared more than the seal. Below the square seam, stamped into the iron the way the city stamped its inspection plates, was a date. And Tabitha stood in the cold boiler room with the lamp throwing her shadow huge against the brick. And she read the date twice, 3 times, and could not make it be anything other than what it was. It was stamped 4 years after her mother was laid in the ground. Ardith had been gone 20 years. The seal on the boiler had been set by someone 16 years ago. Tabitha stood very still with the brass key in the lock and the cold coming up through her shoes, and the only question in the whole steaming, breathing building was the one she could not answer. Who had fed the lock when the woman who built it was already 4 years in her grave? She did not turn the key. Not that morning. A woman who has been handed one impossible thing in a single summer learns to set the second one down gently and walk around it a while. Tabitha lifted the brass valve key back out of the fitting and looped the bootlace over her head again and let it settle cold against her breastbone where it had ridden for 35 years, and she carried her lamp back up the boiler stairs into the gray Hattiesburg morning with the cicadas already starting their long electric drone in the pines off Mobile Street. She did not sleep much that night either. She lay on the good bed she had bought with soak money, and she listened to the building breathe, and she did the arithmetic over and over in the dark, the way you worry a sore tooth with your tongue. Her mother, Ardith Dunmore, had been laid in the red ground of Hattiesburg 20 years past. The seal on the boiler carried a date stamped 16 years past. 4 years. 4 years between the woman dying and the iron being closed. Steel does not seal itself. Wax does not pour itself and cool. Someone living had stood in that cold brick vault with her mother's tools and her mother's intentions and finished a thing her mother had started, and then walked away and told no one, and watched the building rot for 16 years more without ever once turning a key that was, all that time hanging around the neck of a woman 200 miles north, scrubbing other people's floors. There was only one man it could be. She went to find Odell Pruitt in the morning. He kept a little brick house on the far side of the rail cut, with a workshop out back that smelled of pipe dope and machine oil. The smell of every waterman Tabitha had ever known, the smell of her own childhood. He was 80 if he was a day. Odell, bent at the shoulders now, his hands gone to knots. But his eyes, when he opened the door to her, were clear, and they were not surprised. That was the thing. He was not surprised to see her standing on his step with the question already on her face. He had been waiting, she understood. He had been waiting a long time. "You found the second seal," he said. It was not a question. "You said it," she said. He stood back from the door and let her in, and he put coffee on, and his kitchen was clean the way a careful old man's kitchen is clean. And he set 2 cups down, and he dried each one with a rag before he poured, 3 times around the rim. And Tabitha watched him do it and felt something turn over in her chest, because that was her own habit. The cup dried 3 times, and she had always believed she had invented it herself out of her own particular fussiness. And here it was in an old man's hands, and she understood it had come down to her through the water trade like everything else worth having had come down to her, from Ardith, who had dried her cups 3 times on the bathhouse floor, while a 19-year-old girl hauled buckets and hated her for it. "Your mama trained me," Odell said, sitting heavy across from her, "before you were born. I was a boy off Mobile Street with no people and a bad temper, and she put a wrench in my hand instead of letting the street have me. Same as she did for half this end of town, only nobody knew it because she didn't let them know it. Pass it down, she'd say, not back." He turned his cup. "When she got sick at the end, she called me out to the bathhouse. Couldn't hardly stand by then, and she had me help her set the first tin behind the boiler plate up under the heat lock, where only steam ever let it loose. She told me what was on it. She told me who it was for." He looked at Tabitha steady. "It was for you. It was always for you." "Then why?" Tabitha said, and her voice did not shake. She would not let it. "Why was there a second seal? Stamped 4 years after you buried her." Odell was quiet a long moment. The coffee ticked in the cups. "Because she made me promise to come back," he said, "every 4 years. To bleed the valve and run a little heat up through that line so the wax wouldn't dry out and crack, so the reel wouldn't rot in the damp before her girl ever came home. She knew you'd come. She didn't know when. Could be 5 years, could be 50, she said. But Tabitha will come back to the water, because the water's the only place anybody ever needed her for true. So I went down there every 4 years like clockwork, in the dark, with the place boarded up and Sol Render watching the road, and I warmed that line and I checked that seal and I closed it back up and I put a fresh date on the plate, so the next man, if I died before you came, would know it had been tended. 16 years that stamp is. That's the last time these hands could still turn the valve." He held them up, the knotted, ruined hands. "I can't do it anymore. That's why I came to you in the spring with that work order. I knew my watching was almost done. I needed the one who could still hear the pipes to come and finish it. And that," he said, "has never once in this life been Brett." There it was. The third loop, the one she had carried since the spring without knowing she carried it, paid out clean and quiet across a kitchen table that smelled of oil. For the one who still hears the pipes. Not her son, not the man who read an eviction off a printed page at her birthday supper. Her. It had been her name on that work order the whole time, written there before she was even told she was unwanted, written by a dead woman through a living man's hands, waiting. She sat with it. Outside, a freight went through the rail cut and the cups trembled on the table and went still. "What's on the reel, Odell?" she said softly. "That's not mine to say." He stood, slow, and he put his ruined hand for one moment on her shoulder, the only time in 40 years of knowing each other that Odell Pruitt had ever touched her. "It's hers to say. You go down there and you let the steam do what she built it to do, and you'll hear your mama say it herself. I've kept her voice 16 years. I'm ready to set it down." His hand tightened once. "But Tabitha, before you go down those stairs and turn that key, you make sure the right people are in the room to hear it. She didn't build a lock that only opens under heat so you could listen to it alone in the dark. She built it so it could only be opened in front of witnesses, in the steam, with the baths running. Your mama was a careful woman. She knew exactly who'd need to be standing there." He let her go. "You'll know who. When the time comes, you'll know." Tabitha walked home the long way, down Mobile Street under the pines, past the boarded fronts and the kudzu, pulling the old brick back down into the green, and she let the morning settle the thing into her bones. She did not go down to the boiler that day. There was something else first, and it came to her the way the best things had come to her all that summer, knocking soft at the side door at dusk. It was a girl, 16, maybe 17, thin in the way that is not natural, with a man's flannel shirt too big on her and a canvas bag held against her chest like a shield, and shoes that had walked a long way. She stood in the doorway and did not come in and did not speak, and her eyes went around the steaming room fast, marking the exits, the way an animal marks them, the way a person marks them when they have learned the hard way that rooms can close. May Loomis saw her first and went very still, and then very gentle, the way a nurse goes gentle, and signed nothing, only stepped back to make the doorway wider, to make the room less of a trap. "You hungry?" Tabitha said. "Not who are you, not where are your people, just you hungry, the way you'd say it to anybody come in out of the dark." The girl's eyes filled, and she fought it, and she won, and she gave one small nod. "Mind the step," Tabitha said. "There's cornbread. There's a bath if you want one, the green room, it'll take the road out of you." She did not ask the girl's name. A name was a thing you gave when you were ready to give it, and not before. And Tabitha, of all people on Mobile Street, knew now what it was to be handed a label across a table before you were ready. She let the girl sit. She let the girl eat. She let the steam and the warm cedar smell do their slow work in the corner of the room, and after a long while, when the lamp was low, the girl set down her fork and said to nobody, to the steam, in a voice rubbed raw, that her name was Junie and she wasn't going back. "All right," Tabitha said, that was all. "All right." And she made up the second cot in the back room near May's, and Junie slept that night under a real roof for the first time in some long stretch of nights Tabitha did not ask about. And in the morning, the girl was still there, which Tabitha had half feared she would not be, and she was standing at the green-tiled basin with her sleeves pushed up, watching the mineral water rise, watching the way Tabitha read the pipe with her flat palm, and she said, "How'd you know it was about to run hot? You weren't even looking." "I was listening," Tabitha said. "Come here. Put your hand flat. There. Feel where the note changes." And the girl Junie put her thin hand against the cold iron beside the old woman's, and her face, when the pipe sang under her palm, was the face of someone being handed, for the first time, a thing that could not be taken back. "Pass it down," Ardith had said, across all those years, not back. Tabitha understood, watching the girl's face, that she had just begun to do it, that this was the shape of it, that her mother had not raised her up to keep her hands a secret to die with, but to give them away, down the line, to the next unloved child who walked in out of the dark with a bag held against her chest. She could have stayed in that morning forever, the three of them and the old soldier on his chair by the gate, the steam rising, the building breathing, needed and not alone, her supper table full at last of people, none of them sharing her blood. It would have been enough. After a lifetime of being kept for her hands and not her heart, it was already so much more than enough that some nights she lay awake afraid of it, the way you are afraid of a thing too good to be allowed to keep. But Odell's words sat in her, patient as the wax under the iron. You make sure the right people are in the room to hear it. She knew exactly who he meant. She had known the moment he said it, standing in his clean kitchen with the freight, shaking the cups. So on a Thursday at the end of that long June, Tabitha Dunmore sat down at the little office desk in the breathing bathhouse, and she took a clean sheet of paper, and in her careful slanting hand, the hand she had got from her mother along with everything else, she wrote 2 letters, one to her son Brett, one to his wife Camille. She did not write them as a woman begging to be let back to a table. She wrote them as a woman with a key around her neck and a building behind her, and the steam keeping its secret 1 room down. "Come to Miss Ardith's place on Mobile Street," she wrote. "There is something of your grandmother's you are owed to hear. Come Sunday. I will have tea on." And she sealed the letters, and she dried her pen 3 times before she set it down, and she sat in the warm cedar dark and listened to the water move in the walls, and she waited for Sunday to come. Sunday came in hot and white over Hattiesburg, the cicadas already up in the pines by the time the first car turned off Mobile Street and came slow down the rutted drive toward the bathhouse. Tabitha had been awake since 4. She had bled the lines and run the heat up gentle through the green room and the blue, so that by mid-morning the whole building stood thick and breathing, the steam curling out under the eaves, the way it had not curled since before Brett was born. She had set the long table in the front room with the good cups, the ones she had bought back with soak money, and she had dried each one and set it down, and she had put the kettle on, and she had waited. Brett came up the steps first, and Camille behind him, and the 2 of them stopped in the doorway the way people stop when a place they expected to find dead has somehow gone on living without them. Brett had dressed for it. He had on the good shirt he wore to the bank, and his face was already working at something, already arranging itself into the patient, wronged expression of a man come to settle a thing he believes is owed. Camille's eyes went around the room fast, marking the fresh paint, the swept tile, the soaks running, and Tabitha watched her doing the sum in her head, watched her pricing it. "Mama," Brett said, "we came because you asked. But I'll be honest with you, all this, it doesn't change where we are. The house is the house. The numbers are the numbers." "Sit down, Brett," Tabitha said, low and unhurried. "Camille, there's tea." They sat. They did not want to, and they sat anyway, because she had not raised her voice, and a voice that does not rise is harder to push against than one that shouts. She poured for them both. She dried the rim of Brett's cup before she set it in front of him, 3 times around, slow, and she saw him watch her do it, and she saw him not understand that he was watching his own grandmother's hands. May Loomis stood quiet by the green door with her arms folded, nurse still. Saul Render sat by the gate where he always sat, his cane across his knees, his old soldier's eyes on the drive, and Odell Pruitt stood back against the brick by the boiler stairs with his ruined hands folded in front of him, and he gave Tabitha one small nod, and she understood that the right people were in the room. "Drink your tea," she said, "and then I want you to hear something. It isn't mine. It's your grandmother's." She left it for whoever could open the room she built it in. That turned out to be me. She went down the boiler stairs with the lamp, and Junie went with her, the girl steady on the steps now after a month of learning the building's bones. And together they lifted the brass valve key on its bootlace and fitted it to the heat lock, and Tabitha turned it, and the steam she had been building all morning came up under the first tin and softened the wax her mother had poured a lifetime ago, and the seal gave, and the copper tin lifted out warm into her 2 hands like a loaf out of an oven. She carried it up into the front room and set it in the cradle Odell had built and threaded the wax reel onto the spindle. And she looked at her son across the steaming table, and she said nothing at all. She let the machine speak. There was a hiss and a crackle, and then under it, rising the way the steam itself rose, a woman's voice, low, unhurried, dried at the edges by 20 years, and by the wax, and by the heat, but unmistakable to the one person in the room who had spent 19 years hating it and the rest of her life missing it. Ardith Dunmore's voice came up out of the steam and filled the room she had built to hold it. "If you're hearing me, the voice said. Then the heat's done its work, and the one I made this for has come home to the water at last. Tabitha, daughter. I know what you carried out of this house at 19. I know you went believing I sent you to the floor because I didn't love you. I sent you to the floor because you were the only one of mine who could hear it. I couldn't tell you that then. A gift like that, you can't hand a child in words. She'll drop it. You have to let her find it in her own 2 hands. So I let you hate me, and I kept the deed. And I built you a door that nobody could open but you. Brett had gone very still. Camille's cup had stopped halfway to her mouth. This house was never sold, Ardith's voice went on. I put it in a trust the year I got sick, and I named the heir in this trust, and the heir is my daughter, Tabitha Dunmore. Soul and whole, the building and the ground and everything the trust has gathered to itself since. You were provided for the whole time, girl. Every year you spent thinking you were the used-up one. You owned the ground under your own feet and didn't know it. Tabitha did not weep. She had thought she might, and she did not. She sat with her hands flat on the warm table and let her mother finish. And there's a last thing, the voice said. And even through the wax, you could hear it go careful, go deliberate, the voice of a woman who had thought a long way ahead. A trust gathers what's owed to it. When my children, or my children's children, borrowed against this family's name down at the bank, the note came to rest where all the family's notes rest. It came home to the trust. So the same hand that holds this house holds the paper on whatever was put up against it. I built it that way on purpose. And whoever turns my Tabitha out, turns themselves out. The reel ran on a moment into hiss, and then it ended, and the only sound in the room was the water moving in the walls. Brett's face had gone the color of the steam. He understood it before Camille did. He was a contractor. He read paper for a living, and he understood, sitting there with his grandmother's tea going cold in front of him, exactly what had just been said. The house he had refinanced, the business he had borrowed against, the collateral he had been so certain was his, the cramped house he had told himself was rightfully his future, the thing he had been 60 days from losing to the bank. It had not gone to the bank. The note had moved. It had moved into a trust on Mobile Street, and the trustee of that trust was the woman he had slid an eviction across a birthday table to be rid of. That can't be legal, Camille said, but her voice had no floor under it. The county recorder validated the trust on Friday, Tabitha said. Odell drove me. It was filed the year your grandmother got sick, Brett, signed and witnessed and sealed, 20 years before you ever thought to borrow against this family. The lien on your collateral came due into the trust this week. I'm the trustee. She reached into her apron then, and she took out a single folded paper, soft now from being carried, and she set it on the table and slid it across to him, the way he had once slid one across to her, slow, so the people in the room could see it travel. It was his own eviction notice, the one he had read aloud over an uncut cake. This is void, she said. I'm not holding you to it. I had it pulled. I want you to have it back. He looked at the paper and did not touch it. You're not going to lose the house, Brett, she said, and her voice never rose, not once. The trust holds your note now, not the bank, and the trust isn't going to foreclose on my grandchildren. They'll keep their roof. You'll make your payments to the trust, which is to say to me, which is to say to the woman you called a line item you couldn't carry, every month, on time. And the first time one of those grandbabies wants to know why, you're going to tell them the truth. You're going to tell them their great-grandmother loved a daughter so well she hid a whole house inside the steam to keep her safe, and that you almost threw that daughter out with the trash before you ever knew it. She folded her hands. That's the rent. That's all of it. I'm not asking you to love me. I stopped needing that at a birthday supper. I'm asking you to remember. Brett opened his mouth, and nothing came, and Camille's eyes had filled, and Tabitha did not soften and did not harden. She simply stood, and she dried her hands on her apron, and she said, Your tea's gone cold. You can show yourselves out. Mind the step." And she turned her back on the table, the first time in 76 years she had ever turned her back on a child of hers and felt the floor stay steady under her feet. And she walked toward the green room where the steam was, and she did not look to see them go. By the next county term, the foreclosure had moved on the record the way her mother had built it to move, the collateral lawfully into the Bathhouse Trust, Tabitha Dunmore named trustee in the recorder's own ledger, and a clerk who had grown up 2 streets over repainted the inspection placard on the boiler room door so the name on the work order read the way Ardith had written it, "For the one who still hears the pipes," in fresh paint that would not fade. And out front, where the hand-painted sign had peeled for 35 years, Sol Render climbed a ladder on his good days and lettered it new, and under the old name he added a smaller line, so that any thin child walking up out of the dark off Mobile Street would read it before she ever knocked. There is a bath here. There is cornbread. There is a cot. That evening, when the others had gone and the lamp was low, Tabitha sat at the boiler room bench with Junie beside her, and she poured the warm wax, and she pressed a fresh reel down into the new copper tin, and she set the girl's thin hand flat against the iron so she could feel the heat lock take its seal. She turned the lamp down low. The steam still keeps her secrets.